Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'm basically trying a new format for my videos going on forward. I'll be basically using PowerPoint presentations. Now, I'm making this video on stylometry and hadith preservation, basically because I think my other videos, although very good, but they don't cover each of the contention. Now, my intention with this video is to cover each of the contention with regards to stylometry and to bring up basically to bring the argument forward in a nuanced way, and addressing each contention will help me inshallah do that, because while some of these contentions are quite interesting, a lot of these are just desperate. Now, what is stylometry? Stylometry is basically a linguistic analysis done on any text or any work, right, to see who its author is, whether it has one author, two authors, whether two works have the same author, whether they don't have the same author. This is what stylometry is. It's basically a linguistic test, right? Now, I've linked the wiki reference here because I think it does a pretty good job of explaining what stylometry is. Also, it links a lot of valuable references, inshallah, that I'll be using in my basically in this presentation. Now, why am which studies am I using? There are basically numerous studies done on Quran and Hadith, stylometric studies, by an Algerian scholar named Halim Sayoud. I have actually corresponded with this scholar, and I'll bring up our correspondence later, inshallah. There are a few studies in which other scholars are involved with Halim Sayoud, and there's a completely independent study done by a university in England that has two other authors who have done a stylometric study on authentic ahadith and fabricated ahadith. I'll use those later, inshallah, as well. I've linked to two papers here that by Halim Sayoud, and I mean one of these was published in a really I think in a conference. It's actually seemed like a quite major conference, and I will link the book of it as well. I don't remember the exact name now, but I mean these studies are widely published, so no one can claim I'm just bringing some unknown random thing. These studies are around for 10 years now, so this is not something vague or made up. Now, what do these studies basically prove, right? Among other things, these studies show that the sayings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Sahih Bukhari have one author. Now, this leads to a very strong argument for hadith preservation, and I'll explain why. Firstly, understand this point, and by the way, this argument will apply to Sahih Muslim to quite a large extent as well. I'll mention why in a moment. Firstly, every single ahadith that is present in Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim is narrated elsewhere as well in an earlier time, so we can be certain that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim did not make up these ahadiths. Just keep this in mind, for you to be certain that Imam Bukhari or Imam Muslim are not the one author here, right? Secondly, these ahadiths are narrated by numerous companions, their followers, numerous number of narrators in different times and places in different regions: Makkah, Medina, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, right? Numerous regions, Yemen. So, if people were making these up, right, these studies will not have these things would not have one author, as the stylometric studies prove. If these ahadith were going back to multiple sources, they won't have one author, as the stylometric studies prove. The only way these can have one author is if the narrators were honest, and if these narrations go back to a common source. The only common source in those narrations is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, this shows clearly that these ahadiths go back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, which is why this is a very strong point for hadith preservation, because to show these ahadiths go back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to prove hadith preservation. Now, this is the basic argument. As you can see, it's a very strong argument. It's very common and clear, simple and clear cut. Like, Lay people can understand this argument. It's that simple and it's that strong. It's clear cut. Now, what I want to do is move into the contention regarding this argument that I made against this argument, right? Now, there are six basic contentions: circular reasoning. Not all ahadith are analyzed. Stylometry can fail in some cases. This could be accidental. Genre convention not respected. Haytham Sidki study. These are basically six contentions. I will go into each of them to show you that these contentions fail and that my argument stands. Firstly, the point about circular reasoning. Now, this is such a strong argument that this has led to some desperate people to claim that the studies involve circular reasoning, that they are basically assuming that the that studies cannot prove anything, right? They are basically assuming their conclusions. Now, this is a baseless claim. This is not just one study. This is numerous. There are numerous studies done on this topic, and stylometry is such a successful method that is even used in forensic science, right? If this method is strong enough to be used in forensic science, how could this have the method of stylometry have inherent circular reasoning involved? It wouldn't. It's a widely accepted method. It wouldn't have if it had circular reasoning involved. It wouldn't have. It wouldn't be widely accepted. That's just common sense. Now, another contention is made that in the studies the author is clearly mentioning that these are the words of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a contention is made that the author is basically assuming his conclusions, right? Now understand this point. The author can believe these are words of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that cannot affect his study, especially if it is as widely like this is published 57 times. This has been cited. My mistake. This has been cited 57 times, and this study is around for 10 years. If there was some claim of circular reasoning or author being biased, you can bring a valid argument against it, but there is no argument against that. I mean, this is just desperate whining against this study. Secondly, the studies were not even about hadith preservation. How can the author be assuming his conclusions, right? If the studies are not even about hadith preservation, they were about basically differentiating between the author of Quran and Hadith, and there these studies are a proof for the truth of Islam as well. But the point about hadith preservation is a added bonus, you can call it, because this is also proven from the study. Now, I think that is sufficient to address the point about circular reasoning. Again, it's actually the fact that this point is being brought up, right? It just goes to show the strength of this argument, because I mean, you cannot accuse this method of circular reasoning if it is so widely accepted. The people making this contention are not even claiming that the author was biased at times. Some of them are simply saying the author was not biased, still there is circular reasoning involved. But if this method is widely accepted, how can there be circular reasoning involved in the method as itself? There can't be. So I think this contention is just pathetic. Now, a second contention is made, and I have basically lumped two contentions here. One contention is that not all ahadiths were analyzed, so this study cannot prove authenticity of all ahadiths or all Sunni ahadiths or all Sahih ahadiths. A second contention is many ahadiths were transmitted not just word for word, they were transmitted phrase like in meaning, like they were paraphrased. Now, the first contention, not all ahadiths were analyzed. Yeah, that's true. The study can only comment on the ahadiths that were analyzed, right? But there is actually not just one study by one set of authors, right? There is an independent study by completely different authors in England, in a completely different country, and I will actually bring up that study, why that goes to further argue for hadith preservation and why that uses even more ahadith. I'll go into that afterwards. Now, the second contention here is that many ahadiths were paraphrased, so there is no reason for them to have an author or for them to go back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many ahadiths were paraphrased, right? No one says all hadiths were paraphrased. There is no number for how many hadiths were paraphrased. If you look at this, basically I've linked here two references, right? Both those scholars have written books on hadith, transmission of a hadith, and Hadith methodology and literature. If you go look at the simple pages that I've mentioned, you will see that transmission by meaning is one of the methods, but transmission word for word is another method. Both methods were used in transmission of ahadith. So the ahadith on which studies have been done till now, these can be ahadith that were mostly transmitted word for word. What's the issue with this? This does not go against what the traditional Sunni scholars are saying. How can it? I mean, the books I am mentioning here are by Muslim scholars who are basically talking about ahadith, and the transmission word for word is one of the methods that is mentioned by which ahadiths were transmitted. So again, this contention does not work. And by the way, I've actually seen Orientalists try to use traditional Sunni scholarship to try to refute me on this point. Firstly, the Sunni scholarship does not refute me on this point, as the references I've mentioned here clearly show. Secondly, I mean, this just goes to show the desperation of Orientalists, that these guys are basically spent their entire lives try to their entire field is about refuting Islam and Islamic scholarship, mainly Sunni scholarship, and to refute me they are trying to use Sunni scholarship. I mean, this is just pathetic. But more than that, anyone who has studied ahadith, right, they will know that the early muhaddiseen, the major Sunni scholars who have spent a long time with the words of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could just look at a ahadith, its matan, not its isnad even. They could look at a matan and tell if Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said those words or not. I mean, this is a crude, basic form of identifying by linguistics, which is very similar to what stylometry achieves. Of course, stylometry is a much more advanced method of it, but stylometry clearly there is clearly a basis for this in our tradition, where the Sunni scholars, could just look at the words of a ahadith and tell if that goes back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not. So again, this is another worthless contention. Now the third contention is that stylometry can fail in some cases. Okay, 3 points here. Firstly, the issue of probability. Let's say a method works 9 times out of 10, right? It would have a 90% probability of working. The entire endeavor of historical studies, right, of any topic, it's a matter of probability. What Orientalists and basically kuffar in general want to do is that they want to basically not have any burden of proof for their claims, and they want to put the entire burden of proof on the Muslims for their claims. They can make just claims without any evidence, and Muslims have to give 100% certain arguments. We don't. This is a matter of probability, and the method is very strong, and if it doesn't work in every single case, but it works in numerous cases, or 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, then that is a very strong argument for hadith preservation. Now, stylometry is such a strong method that it's even used in forensic science. If it was a weak method, right, why would it be used in forensic science to investigate criminal cases? That is a very serious topic. Why would it be used there? The third point, use of authorship style in biblical scholarship. Now, basically you will see a lot of times these basically Orientalists and their followers in Muslim countries, right, they want to apply the same style of biblical criticism to Quran and Ahadith. But one of the main one of the main methods used for authenticating a text is the style of the author in biblical studies. I'll just give one example here. There are 7 books in the New Testament that are authentically attributed to the Apostle Paul. One of the main arguments for this is authorship style. So if authorship style can be used for authorship identification in biblical studies, why can't it be used in Islamic studies for Quran and Hadith? Again, this just goes to show the double standards of Orientalists and kuffar in general. Moving on to the next contention. Now, this contention is that this could just be random or accidental, or that everyone in different places and times could magically make up the same style, and like numerous authors can have the same style and forge basically all these ahadiths. Now there is a major problem with this. Think about this. Forgery is a skill, right? Like any other skill, most of the people would be poor at it, quite a few people will be mediocre at it, and very few people will be excellent at it. If we are supposed to believe that this is accidental, what we are basically being asked to accept is that magically the numerous people who are narrating these ahadiths, right, all of them magically became expert forgers, so good that they could beat stylometry. I mean, this is a level of blind faith that is truly astonishing. And actually, there's another study I have linked here. I'll go on to share this. This is a study by independent authors in England, right? I will go on in a later slide to show that why this is an even strong argument for hadith preservation. Moving on. Just to add one more thing, think about this. I mean, the level of desperate claims regarding this point. If if any other skill, right, takes a lot of effort to learn, and most people are mediocre and poor at it, very few people are good at it, how can we believe that magically so many narrators became experts at forgery, so great that they can even beat stylometry? I mean, this point simply doesn't make sense. Now moving on to genre convention. Now another contention is that is made against stylometry by an Orientalist actually, that stylometry cannot account for genre convention. Now if you look at the Wikipedia article I linked earlier, there is a very specific example of stylometry being used mentioned. In this example, one of the plays by an English playwright in 16th century that was attributed to someone else was actually a work of William Shakespeare, and stylometry helped prove this point. Now English literary genre are basically the same, so stylometry can distinguish between the other author and the works of William Shakespeare. So stylometry can account for genre. Again, this contention also fails. Now, the most interesting contention is basically a study done by Haitham Sitki. I have not linked it here because I couldn't find it, but I couldn't find the link for it. But this study is very well known. People know about this study, so it's not something I'm making up. Now, what this study basically did, it was on Sephardic inscription. They were ancient inscriptions, right, in the Sephardic language, or it's basically a language. They were discovered, and they were by numerous people. And Haitham Sitki did a study on these, and they were shown to have one author. So you can see why this study can be used against my argument. Now I'll just rebut this with some responses why this contention, although interesting, will not work. Firstly, Haitham Sitki's study was on Sephardic language, right? Arabic language was much more developed than Sephardic language. It was a highly developed language, and at that time period, and this is admitted by scholars. Now I'll just quote one scholar who is talking about the Arabic language and poetry at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This reference is from the book Divine Reality by Hamza Zortzis, page 276. Naveed Karmani, a writer and expert in Islamic studies, explains the extent to which the Arabs had to study to master the Arabic language, which indicates that the 7th century Arab lived in a world that revered poetry. Old Arabic poetry is a highly complex phenomenon. The vocabulary, grammatical idiosyncrasies, and strict norms were passed down from generation to generation, and only the most gifted students fully mastered the language. A person had to study for years, sometimes even decades, under a master poet before laying a claim to the title of poet. Muhammad ﷺ grew up in a world which almost religiously revered poetic expression. So this reference goes to show that the Arabic language was highly developed. In fact, many scholars will agree that the Arabs were at the peak of Arabic literature and poetry. So Arabic language was highly developed than Sephardic language. That's just that's one of the responses to Haitham Sitki's study. The second response is that stylometry can actually distinguish between works of Arabic language. Now, there are two studies linked here. I'll get to the one about the Hadith. Before I get to that, I want to get to another study that was done by Halim Sayoud. Now, the Algerian scholar I mentioned earlier. Now, what he did was basically take 10 Arabic texts, right? I think it from the 10th century or 11th, 12th, 13th century. I don't remember exactly when. What he did was do a stylometric study on each of them. What this method shows was that 10 different authors were identified. So there are 10 books by 10 different authors, and stylometry can identify them as 10 books with 10 different authors. So stylometry can be used for Arabic languages. We can clearly prove this. Now there's another study that I mentioned earlier from the study in England by scholars, right? And this is one of the most important reasons I'm actually making this video, and I think this rebuts Haytham Sidki's study. This is about authentic ahadith and fabricated ahadith. What this shows is that authentic ahadith can be differentiated from fabricated ahadith with a very strong probability, like the test with the highest percent was 78%, but a lot of tests could differentiate between authentic ahadith and fabricated ahadith above 70%. So if it was just random guess, right, think about it. If the test was just randomly picking out authenticated and fabricated ahadith, sahih ahadith and maudu ahadith, it would have fabricated ahadith, it would have been 50% probability, right, 1 in 2, but this is actually much more than that. So this stylometric study can clearly distinguish linguistically between authenticated or the sahih ahadith and fabricated ahadith. Well, what does this point show? This shows that people could not just make up ahadith randomly. Like, people could not just try and make up sahih ahadith randomly. This rebuts the earlier point as well. But just think about this. This shows that if the sahih ahadith are linguistically similar, they are going back to a common source. Again, proving my point. One more thing. This study also proves that ahadith could not be randomly made up. Right? All ahadith, fabricated and authentic, will not have one author, which was the contention of Haytham Sidki's study. So I think that point is basically refuted very strongly by the second study, and I don't think there is any way to argue against my point about Hadith preservation because of that. Both the studies by Halim Sayoud and his fellow scholars and the study in England, I think they are a clear-cut proof for Hadith preservation, because both of these show that Sahih authentic ahadith, they are similar linguistically, and them being different from fabricated ahadith shows that this style could not be randomly made up. If think about this, if authentic and fabricated ahadith can be differentiated linguistically, that shows that the authentic ahadith could not be made up, because the fabricated ahadith were an attempt to make up authentic ahadith, and that clearly fails, as we can see from stylometry. So inshallah, I tried to address all the contentions here with regards to my stylometry argument. I was trying to make a new way of producing videos for YouTube. Inshallah, do share your thoughts on it in the comments. Do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, what you think about the argument, about the video presentation. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.